Hi, folks. This is Jay. Hope you're okay, folks, and it's good to be with you. I just got a special guest today, and I really appreciate him coming on to have a chat. And it's Bernie, and it's good to see you, Bernie, and thanks for coming on. And I look forward to having a chat with you, bro.
Hi, Jason. Greetings from Portland, Oregon.
Good to see you, bro. I'm from Manchester, mate. And have a good Christmas tomorrow, yeah? Or is it Christmas there today, or?
No, today is the 24th. Yeah.
Oh, right. All right.
Hey,
Well,
hey, by the way, have you heard of Sunday Assembly?
Sunday Assembly?
Yeah.
No,
In
no.
London. It started in London.
Sunday Assembly? No.
Oh, it's called the Church Without the God Bits, and they kind of went all around the world, and I help on a local chapter here. I thought you would know about that since you're in the UK.
Is it like an atheist running like doing church type
It's
thing?
basically for anybody of any religion. It's kind of like imagine a world where religion was no longer relevant, like in Star Trek, for example, and basically just coming together and singing pop songs and listening to inspirational messages based on science and reason and things like that. So it's an interesting experiment. It's kind of like imagine a world where I'm not sure if I lost some connection with you there. For example, and basically just coming together. It sounds like, did we lose some connection?
Yeah, a little bit. Go on, keep going, Bernie. I can't see you, but if you we're still on the Google Hangout, bro.
Okay. Well, I was just mentioning, maybe I'll talk a little slower since we're going over the long internet wire over the ocean, I guess. Yeah, Sunday Assembly they call it a church without the God bits. So basically they do popular singing, popular songs, and have lectures based on science and reason. It's like as if in the future, 1,000 years from now, God is irrelevant because nobody cares anymore.
Yeah, I've noticed one or two things like that popping up in the UK, but yeah. So I'd be interested if you got a website link or anything that people could look at, bro, or anything.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'll try to send it to you later. But it started in the UK, so I thought you might be familiar with it.
Not that particular one. Not that particular one, bro.
Okay.
So it's over to you if you want me to start or if you want to start.
Yeah, I'll let you start. I think we talked about, I said I think it'd be interesting to talk about the reasons for believing in the existence of God, because a lot of these other debate questions stem from that, like what is the meaning of life and what is morality and all that stuff. The answer changes whether God exists or not. So it seems to me the most important question is, does God exist? So I thought that'd be an interesting thing to talk about.
Okay, well, I looked at a couple of your shows, a couple of your videos today, and you kind of seem to bring up four things. You ask questions about Adam and Eve, you ask questions about Noah's Ark, and one about morality, and then one about why is there something rather than nothing or something. So I watched a few videos where you bring up those questions, and so I've thought about it. And I think for me, I can't. Bernie, there's no way I can match you on the scientific stuff today because I haven't been able to do the research, because you normally bring up stuff about DNA and things like that. So I'd need more time to research that. For me, I think that it comes down to rationality, because all these arguments that you use and in defense of your position, and if you look at the history of Western thinking for the last 200 or 300 years, I think it comes down to rationality and an explanation of rationality. So for me, one of the things that I find compelling is the transcendental argument, which Greg Banson uses, or as used, and that is to say that we can't know anything without positing God. So, for example, the laws of logic, the basic laws like the law of non-contradiction. Well, I just wait because it seems to be sticking. If logic is material and something that we've invented, then how does that work in a scientific materialistic construct?
Well, first off, when you say materialistic, I think a better word, if we could agree, would be naturalistic worldview. You could say I'm a materialist, but the thing that kind of is misleading about that is people think of material like it's a substance. And for example, at the time of the Big Bang, it said that there is no material whatsoever. There's nothing solid. There's just pure energy. And then according to E equals MC squared, energy can transform into matter, and that's where all the matter came from, the Big Bang. So just to be clear, I don't believe that matter is everything. I mean, there's energy also, and there was energy, all energy before matter, most likely, in this universe.
But when I say materialistic, I mean it in that broader spectrum of whether it be matter, whether it be energy, it's some kind of substance.
Well, energy is not a substance.
Well, I don't want to argue about words. It's something. It's rather than nothing, is it not?
Sure, yeah, but I mean, usually a substance has like electrons, neutrons, protons, and all that, and energy does not have any of that.
Well, I'm not using it in a sort of scientific sense. I'm just using it in a broad, general sense of trying to say that there's some things that are there rather than not there.
Sure. Yeah.
Semantics. The issue is about, do you regard the laws of logic, those basic laws, like the law of non-contradiction, are they material in terms of relational to matter? Are they related to energy, or are they immaterial and not related to them at all?
Yeah, they seem to me they're immaterial, but I would also like to say that there are certain questions that philosophers with PhDs will argue amongst themselves. Like, for example, one question is, do numbers really exist ontologically? Do they exist somewhere? And somebody might say, like, well, of course they exist. I could see two ducks in my duck pond, and it's like, well, you see two, but that's not really a two in nature. That's a human construct. And so, do numbers actually exist? And I heard William Lane Craig, who's the most popular Christian debater. Did I lose you? I think. Okay. I'm not sure if we lost connection. Yeah, I was going to say William Lane Craig is the most popular Christian debater, and he says this is something that philosophers debate about, like even if numbers exist. And so, did I lose you again? Okay. So I think numbers are kind of like morality. So numbers and morality are like the same question. Do these ontologically exist? Okay. I'm not sure how much you got that, because it seemed like my video feed was getting messed up.
I missed a little bit, but I respect what you're saying, but there seems to be a contradiction there, because you're saying that logic is immaterial, and then you're saying that there's a debate about the ontological significance of numbers, which posits the possibility from, correct me if I'm wrong, from your side, that numbers would be a projection of the mind. So how does logic that you've said and admitted is immaterial work in terms of the mind? If logic is immaterial, does it have an ontological status within the mind? And if it does, how can it be immaterial when the mind is material?
Yeah, so what I was trying to say as a general overview is that numbers, morality, and logic, they're all in the same boat. Even time, does time exist? They're all in the same boat. These are things that philosophers with PhDs will argue about.
But Bro, Bernie,
Hmm.
I respect you for your, when I'm listening to you on the, I've watched a couple of your videos, and what I find about you is you're very confident and you know your stuff, so I wouldn't even begin to tussle with you on scientific stuff because I know you know your stuff, and I'd need a few weeks to do my research. But if a creationist came on and responded like that, you would do the Bernie smile. You know, that little smile where you know that you've kind of like, that's not cutting you, just to say that philosophers debate or discuss. You've made a statement that you've said that logic is immaterial. Now, is
Hmm.
the brain material? And if the brain is
Well,
material,
well,
how
okay. So,
how do the two connect?
okay. So, okay. So I said what I said about what I'm trying to say is that people much smarter than 10 times smarter than both of us argue about these things in philosophy. Okay. So that's just background. So now I'll go forward with you and talk to you logically based on my understanding. But the big picture is if you say, how did the laws of logic come to be? I would say the big question is, I don't know.
Well, the law of non-contradiction was discovered by Aristotle, and it was debated by it was try Hegel tried to negate it, but but if it's something that we've invented, or it's a social construct, then it's not really, everything that you've been doing, you're arguing for against creationists, and everything that we're
No,
doing
no,
now.
no, wait, I would not say it's a social construct.
Okay,
I, I, I think we have agreement that it's something that's separate from time, space, matter, and all that stuff. It's something that transcends that.
okay. So is it something that is created by the mind itself, even though it's not a social construct?
Well, like you said, I agree with you. I think we think similarly that it's discovered.
But you've admitted that it's immaterial, but is it a projection? Is basic laws of logic? Is it something, a projection of the mind, or is it something that is also
I lost your video there. Can you repeat the question?
the the issue is that you've admitted that it's the law of the basic laws are immaterial, which to me that is very big of you. That's very honest for you to do that. But it seems to me then there seems to be a bit of a trouble there. Is that from what I know of what I've seen of your videos, you're very one of the big things for you is you're very scientifically orientated. This is the big thing that you would be believing in some kind of materialist understanding of the brain, that the brain is material and
Well,
therefore.
instead of saying material, can you say naturalistic? I think it makes more sense. It's more
Okay,
clear.
okay, if you want me to do that,
Okay.
I'll do that, Bernie. Yeah, if it
Okay.
if it if it's from a naturalistic perspective on the brain. So how could you just? I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just trying to. How do you connect the two? How are the two connected? How's logic that is immaterial, basic laws? Because there's logic that brain to this immaterial logic. How do you get the two together?
Okay.
Because
I think I lost half of your question, but I got some of the words. So the way it seems pretty clear that we have the physical brain, and from the physical brain emerges a mind, just like blood flow emerges from the heart and the circulatory system. You've got the mind, which is an activity of the brain. So I don't see anything supernatural going on there.
so
Yeah, go ahead.
no, go on. I'm listening, bro.
So, and then as far as morality, I mean, not morality, as far as logic, it seems like um, it seems like there's logical truths out there, and I don't, like I said, I don't know. I'm kind of like you, where it's not something I'm an expert at. I think it seems like that's a very difficult question for even people with PhDs to understand.
Well, to me, it goes to the heart. If you look at the history of the Enlightenment, if you look at Kant and the great philosophers and the great scientists up to the last 200 years, the issue of this, all this creation, evolution, and all this, it all comes down to rationality and how we understand rationality, and whose position is most rational. And and so if we can't really grapple with this question of the nature of rationality, because that's the key. Because when I'm listening to you debating, what you're doing is you want to explain things in a rational way, and you believe that your position is a more rational position, and I respect that position, and so this issue of logic and the nature of logic is not just a philosophical pie in the sky, or it is a very deep debate, which you're correct to say that, and I think that's really right to say that. But Bernie, when you look at your side of the equation, when you look at your scholars and thinkers, and you look at our side and whatever, personally, this is my own thinking, reading the history of the Enlightenment, is it all comes down to ultimately whose understanding of rationality is the best. Because these debates about DNA, the complexity of DNA, and then the rejoinders that you make with your arguments of using DNA and the similarities between apes and humans, and all these arguments that you're using, you're bringing in rationality and trying to understand things in a rational way. So this is a very important topic. I'm not using this as some would use to get away from evidential stuff, because if you say to me, Jay, okay, let's have a debate on evolution, if you give me a few weeks on it, I'll do the research for you, and I'll look at, you send me the papers, and I'll read it. But I think it is an important topic, and you are right, it is quite deep. But I think that I need to engage in it more, and I think also you need to engage in it more, bro.
Well, let me give my opinion is the question doesn't matter at all, because we have an agreement that rationality is important, logic and reason is important. So we already have a common ground. So from my perspective, what we need to do is move forward. And for example, when I talk to Kent Hovind, he's a young earth creationist. He says there's no evidence for evolution. I say there is evidence for evolution. So we have common ground of logic and reason. The whole debate is over the evidence. It has nothing to do with where did logic come from. Another thing I want to say about what you said is, you said you have your side, I have my side, but there's no such thing when it comes to evolution, because you can find evangelical Christians like Francis Collins. In fact, most of the scientists, even if they're religious, they accept evolution. So evolution is not an atheistic thing. There is no your side. There is no Christian side to evolution. There's a lot of Christians that accept evolution.
Okay, I think if I can come back at you, that is that my expertise is historical Jesus studies, not in evolution like you and stuff like that. And in historical Jesus studies, there's a guy called Dominic Crossan who's a skeptic, and he was challenged by James White, and James White said there are presuppositions that we have to put on the table, and he said, and in his Irish accent, he said, yeah, but there's data, he said. So he's agreeing with you there in terms of there's data that we've got to look at, and there is common ground, but there is a complex interplay between evidences and our presuppositions. There is that complex interplay, and so yes, there is common ground, but at the same time we do have to look at the nature of evidence, and I would totally agree. We also have to be aware that we come to the evidences with different colored glasses, that you come to the evidence with your atheist glasses. I come to my evidence with Christian glasses. The Hindu comes to it with their glasses. So there is evidences, and we can share common ground, but we are, but
Okay.
but we have to be careful that we do come into it with biases. And like, for example, you've been on record on one of your videos of saying that you are, I think, is it a philosophical naturalist or something
Right.
like that? Yeah. So you're on record saying that. Now that is an important philosophical construct to the way you're going to view evidences.
Okay, but here's something that totally undermines everything you've just said. I was I was raised a Catholic, and then in college I became a born again evangelical Christian. For over 25 years, I was a born again evangelical Christian, growing in the faith, even went to seminary and got a seminary degree. So for me, it's not about, I'm waiting for the video to catch up here. For me, it's not about um, presuppositions, because I had that belief. I would have remained a Christian if I could still have enough to believe in. I didn't think there was still a thread of enough to grasp onto to believe in.
But we can also catch presuppositions like we can catch the measles. You know, you can you can have one presupposition and then it can be undermined by another presupposition. So we, you know, things can come in. You know, it's, you know, it depends what culture you're in and how, you know, if you're going to a university and you're listening to lecturers, you could catch the presuppositions without you realizing it. But the point is, what the issue is here, the important issue is, all I'm saying is that this issue about logic and the nature of logic exposes certain philosophical constructs within your presuppositions and mine, and it's about whether your presupposition matches the reality of what you're saying or what I'm saying.
But
If you're,
okay, let me tell you something. Have you heard of, there's a logical fallacy called confirmation bias? Do you know what that is?
I have, but you'll have to refresh me. I've just did a lot of
So
logical fallacies today.
yeah, so confirmation bias, it doesn't seem like a logical fallacy, because usually logical fallacies have to do with bad logic, but I've seen it listed as a logical fallacy. So basically, confirmation bias means you believe something, and then when you look at the evidence, you try to interpret it in light of what you believe.
Yeah.
And what you should do is try to look at evidence more impartially based on what makes the most facts. And when I was a Christian, my presupposition was I wanted to believe. I did not want to leave the faith. When I became an atheist, it was bad news for me. It was a depressing way to go, but I figured I had to pick the truth over what feels good. So I did not want to leave the faith. My presupposition was for Christianity, but I was open-minded and I wanted to follow the truth, and so I had to go against my presupposition at that point. And basically, I don't even like the word presupposition, because it sounds like the same thing as confirmation bias. This is a bad thing. Presuppositions are a bad thing in science and logic.
Well, I would disagree. I think you can't discuss the nature of evidence without discussing the nature of presuppositions. For example, if you look at the history of historical Jesus studies, Renan came to the life of Christ with his trying to be objective and scientific in his understanding of Christ. Strauss tried to do the same. Bultmann's tried to do the same, but Bultmann created a Jesus in his existential philosophy. Strauss created a Jesus in his German philosophy, and Renan created a Jesus out of his French philosophy. And so,
and then you had Muhammad, and then you also had Muhammad and Joseph Smith later making more Jesuses too.
Bernie, but the point is that they did what you're saying. They tried to look at it scientifically and objectively, but in the end, they created a Jesus out of their own image. So what I'm saying is, I totally agree with you in historical Jesus studies. Data is important. I don't disagree with that. I don't discount that. And I know that you get frustrated when creationists maybe use presuppositional apologetics to get away from looking at the data. So I appreciate what you're saying there. But I think at a higher philosophical level, if you read books like Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, where he's grappling with evidences and presuppositions, you'll find that you cannot get away from this issue of presuppositions. It's not a case of just confirmation bias. It's about looking at your presuppositions and saying whether they comport to reality. And your presupposition that that logic is immaterial does not comport with your naturalistic position, because you know that you believe that the brain is a material object. And how does that work within your position? And it's no good just saying it's all about confirmation bias, let's move on to data. But we can go on to another topic if you want. I think we've exhausted this one.
Well, it seems to me like you're mixing some things up too. When you talk about trying to prove logic, that's the thing is, like I said, we have a starting point. We agree about logic. We're not trying to disagree over whether logic is good or bad or how it works. We agree to basic logic. I personally think most of the problems with young earth creationists like Kent Hovind, for example, is he is scientifically naive. Like, I asked him if he knew about fused human chromosome number 2, and then he said yes, and we talked about it, and then it became obvious he didn't know the argument. So, you know, he says there's no evidence for evolution, and I asked another apologist about this, and he said he wasn't really familiar with these arguments. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not really an apologetics. You're not even in the game until you understand the evidence for evolution. You cannot say there's no evidence for evolution without being aware of the evidence. And the evidence is really quite deep, and it's quite amazing, and it's out there. It's not like it's a hidden secret or something. There's tons of evidence out there on so many different levels, on DNA, on biodiversity. There's just so much science out there, and it's really true that in order to not understand it, to not accept that, you have to be naive, I think, scientifically.
But even if I granted you all that you say is correct, you would still undermine your position, because your position is rationality. You're trying to be rational. And if you're trying to be rational, you're doing science and presenting arguments and evidence and saying that there's a solid position here, but so I grant you your argument, and even if I grant you that argument, you still don't get there to where you want to go. And that is that you're using rationality, and that rationality cannot be explained in your worldview. So, well, okay, even if I granted you your argument, your own argument would implode on itself, because your argument is clear, logical arguments, yeah? So if I grant you that, it would actually implode upon yourself, because how do you get logic, how do you get rationality from nature, from natural selection and mutation, which is not rational? How does that comport with your position?
Okay, so just to back up a little bit, are we in agreement about the laws of logic, that they exist?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So really the question is, where do the laws of logic come from, and does that require a designer? That's what your argument is, right?
No, my argument is that if you're positing rationality, how you want to frame it is up to you. What I'm saying is this: if you're positing a rationality, if you're positing a position for evolution, you are presenting evidence, you are presenting logical reason and arguments, right?
And we've already agreed on that.
Yeah, but that presumes the nature of reality is rational. And if that's
but we've already agreed on that point.
Yeah, wait a minute. But if that is the case, Yeah, but what we've not agreed on is you've not given a rational position for why that nature of reality is rational, and that's the issue. And your
Okay, so
worldview, your
and that's
worldview, your wait, can I just finish? Your worldview and your position assumes that it does not give any rationale for it. So what you're doing is, it's still it's still a jump of faith, or so really what you're doing is you're undermining your position, because on the one hand you want your cake and eating it. You're saying here's it, reality is rational, we can get data for evolution, and I can show you rationally that this is correct. And yet at the same time your own position is irrational, in the sense that the mutation and natural selection, and then going before that abiogenesis, and then before that whatever it is, a big bang, or an infinite regress in the universe, or whatever, string theory, whatever that is, none of that comports to any rational basis, because um, there, there is a lack of whereas in the Christian position, God is rational by nature. And so therefore, if the universe is made, and if we're made, then it explains why there is rationality, why we can have rationality. But without that personhood at the beginning of the equation, it seems impossible to connect the two, from a Big Bang to abiogenesis to natural selection and mutation to rationality. And that's the issue. It's not the evidence that you posit and the logic implodes upon itself because it is not able to give a foundation of rationality.
so basically, like I said, the whole point of your question is asking the question, what is the foundational basis of logic and reason? That's what you're trying to say, right?
Okay.
That's your whole question. And you're trying to say, I have no basis. And you're trying to say that you do have a basis because of your belief in God, right?
On presuppositions, yeah.
Okay, so that's a whole different discussion versus, I mean, that has nothing to do with evolution, because when we talk about evolution, we go forward and we say, okay, we agree to laws of logic and all that. Now let's look at the evidence.
No, it does, because if you read Alvin Plantinga, I think he's written a paper on this. He written a good paper where he says, if evolution is correct, it would actually implode upon itself. It would actually negate rationality. So I mean,
yeah, I know what he says, and he's totally goofy about this. He's basically saying that he's saying by definition, evolution is for basically survival of the fittest. It's about filling an ecological niche. It is not about determining truth. And so there's no reason to believe in evolution that humans would evolve to determine truth, which I think is a really silly argument, because evolution is really an arms battle, and the development of the mind is part of that. And in this struggle for survival, we have to develop our mind, and that involves developing truth, because science, for example, gives us the best weapons, like nuclear technology, and nuclear technology is hardcore science. So to me, it's very obvious that evolution does, I mean, our brain power and truth seeking does help evolution.
But
it's kind of a silly argument from him.
It's not a silly argument. You're actually negating what you're saying. If you say Dr. Meyer, I think it was Meyer, who died a couple of years ago, is a world authority on evolution. He said that evolution is a historical science, in the sense that we have to go back and look at history. If you look at Francis Ayala, who's a philosopher and a biologist, and he talked about in the 1950s where the PhD students in biology were told not to use the word such as words like design or purpose in talking about biological structures, because they didn't want to give a sense about history had meaning or history had purpose, because after 1950s they were sick and tired of these historical meta narratives. And evolution itself is a historical meta narrative.
I agree. I agree with that. Yeah. I agree that evolution is a good alternative origin story.
So it's a view of history, an understanding of history, and
exactly.
in that understanding of history, what you don't seem to realize is you're imploding on yourself every time you use an argument against me for the existence of evolution. You're using rationality. You're implying that there is meaning to rationality. You're implying lots of these things that you're smuggling in, which you don't get from that position, because how can you get meaning? How can you get rationality from natural selection and mutation? Is natural selection an intelligence? Is it a meaning? Is it a purpose? Or is it just a blind force? And what you're doing is you're bringing in words, comporting words with meaning, purpose, rationality to a blind force. And that is your problem. And you're trying to have your cake and eat it philosophically, scientifically, and logically. That's my position.
Well, there is intelligence in a lot of the higher order evolution. For example, mammals, they go. There's migration that takes intelligence. There's mating rituals that takes intelligence. You know how animals select their mates. So it's not just all blind mutation only. There is a mental part to natural selection in the higher animals, at least. Probably not with the lower things like bacteria and viruses, obviously.
But you can't have your cake and eat it. The moment you give any meaning to any specific part of reality within creation, whether scientific or rational, you've negated your own position, because how do you get from a historical process that has no meaning, that has no rationality? So every argument that you're going to use against me, what you're doing is you're smuggling in a historical process that doesn't give you that foundation.
Well, I would just say we both agree that logic is good and true. And the reason why, from my naturalistic viewpoint, is because it works. That's the reason why we use logic. So there's nothing contradictory about logic and naturalism. Just like I said before, logic, numbers, time, these are all deep philosophical concepts that people argue about whether they even exist or if they're just things that humans use as models that work. For example, like we used to say, obviously, space and time are two different things. Then Einstein came up with his theory of general relativity, where he said they are not separate. There's a space-time fabric, and you can warp space and time by huge objects with the gravity. So space and time actually warps. So there's a lot of weird stuff out there that we are figuring out from science that totally don't make any sense from us, because we did not evolve to understand that stuff. We evolved in our middle world, as Dawkins would say, not in the small world or the large world. So that's why we don't understand things like quantum mechanics. They don't make sense to us because we don't operate on the quantum level. But science is a lot of weird things like that, and we accept it because of evidence and logic. We accept it because it works. We can make predictions. We can make new scientific instruments. We can use all this stuff. And that's why we believe in logic, because it actually works.
Well, I know that. I understand where you're coming from. And, the issue of pragmatism, because it works, it's valuable. I understand that. But, even in pragmatism, there is 3-4 different views of pragmatism. There's the Dewey pragmatism, and Rory pragmatism and stuff like that. The issue here, I know I'm laboring it, but the issue, what I'm trying to get at is, if you look at history as a meta-narrative, either history is rational or it's not rational. And what you're trying to do is say, whenever you're using the scientific method, whenever you're bringing any evidence, what you're really doing is you're saying, look, I haven't really got a basis for rationality for history, really. The historical flow is mutations and natural selection. Mutations, I'm smuggling in that it's an intelligence. It's not. It's a force. And therefore, that's the issue. That's the issue. So every time you're using logic, reason, saying from a pragmatic argument, that's your ultimate foundation. So it all comes down to that. If you look at the Enlightenment, if you look at all these debates with Dawkins, you and I've listened to loads of your debates. I've listened to lots of the debates about evolution and creation and all these things. It ultimately comes down to this one question: the nature of rationality and the basis of rationality. That's my, I mean, I have a degree from Nazarene Theological Seminary, but it's accredited. It's accredited from Manchester University, and I like to engage. I do like to engage, and if you send me stuff, I'll read it and I'll look at it. But I do like to read wider, and my understanding of history is that this is the key question of all questions: rationality.
But one of the funny things though is like when people like you say that you believe in rationality and rationality comes from God, and yet you reject evolution, that means that you believe animals appeared instantaneously by a miracle. Like, for example, there was a time where there's no humans, and then boom, all of a sudden there's a time where you have adult humans. Well, if you looked at that adult human as soon as it was made, based on logic, you would be wrong, because it looks like that human, Adam and Eve, it looks like they're reproductive age, like teenagers, but they're only 1 day old. You just you're just blowing away logic there. That's counter logic. That is God being a deceiver, because it looks like humans were around a long time. I mean, and they even have a language. Like in the Bible, the Adam and Eve had a language. So you're blowing away. You cannot believe in inductive logic, because right there it blows away inductive logic. You can't trust your eyes. You can't trust anything, because you may as well believe that you were just created 5 minutes ago or even 5 seconds ago with all your memories intact. How would you know? Maybe God. You can read a holy book where it says everything was created 5 seconds ago, including your memory. You just got to believe it on faith. There's no way to disprove it.
I think,
and then you say, and then you would say, oh, well, God's rational too, by the way. It's like, well, you can't be rational and believe in these radical miracle stories, because they blow away logic.
No,
inductive logic.
I mean, I have to hold my hands up. This is your expertise. It's not my expertise. Is in historical Jesus studies. Your expertise is you debate specifically on these topics. So I don't want to crush swords on the specifics, because you'll know a lot more than me, and I'd need a few weeks to do the research. But what I would know from an academic point of view is that, if you've got data and evidences and scholarship, and you want me to look at it, I will look at it and I'll engage with it. And anybody, whoever they are, should be willing to engage with any data or evidence. And if you put a collection of articles on the table for me and want me to go away and read it, I will read it and come back at you, and we can debate on the specifics of that. But what I would say is that when we're looking at so far back in time, that I think a lot of it comes down to interpretation of that data. So, like, I've seen you debate other people, and I think you've given a good account of yourself, and you've said some really good things that I need to look into. But also, I've heard some of the other guys, I can't, Rayner or whatever his name was. He gave a different he gave a different spin sometimes on some of the things you said. I think he gave a good account of himself sometimes. But yeah, I would agree that there is if there would be some evidences to comport with the biblical data, but I would also say that we wouldn't have all the data, so long as there's a plausibility structure there that is worth holding on to, that has some data. Then I would say I can hold on to that. And my plausibility structure would be who Christ is, the nature of morality and sin, and then creation in terms of the complexity of the cell and things like that. So I would say there is a plausibility structure on some of these things, questions that you bring out on like the flood and things like that. That's not my kind of style of apologetics, but I mean they're good questions, but I'd have to research all that personally, you know. But I wouldn't say, what I would say is that, you know, a lot of it I think is interpretation of the data sometimes, a lot of the time. So for example, when we're looking back at the flood and catastrophe, you know, there are some creationist scholars, even though you might not agree with them, who were people in the scientific community who were doing this stuff, and they got converted and they've seen a different light, but they're seen as like hacks. It's like in the historical Jesus studies, the atheists, from an academic point of view, the atheist community are nowhere in the running when it comes to scholarship as compared to the conservative evangelicals or conservatives. For example, like N.T. Wright, you cannot compare N.T. Wright to a Richard Carey. You cannot compare an N.T. Wright to an Earl Doughty or an N.T. Wright to Roger Price. So, but does that mean to say that I won't look at atheist scholars or not consider that they haven't got some important things? Sometimes it's just about interpretation, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. You have a high estimation of N.T. Wright. I'm not.
Well, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we went way over our 30 minutes. Next time we'll do this, we have to figure out how to. We got a lot of dropped video there. We'll have to figure out how to do this without dropping video.
Well, if you want to do it again, and if you want to give a specific topic, let me know.
Okay.
And it'd be helpful. Then I could, if you send me the stuff that you want me to read, I can then engage with it properly rather than just not engaging with it. I'll engage with it if you want me to think it through, and I'll try.
You know what? Yeah, one of the topics we could talk about is I sent you the link to my essay I wrote, and one of those was I talked about how the gospel is nonsense, and so that might be an interesting topic to talk about.
Okay, should we do that next time then?
Yeah, but first we got to figure out how to get this technically to work out, because this was way too choppy.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll stop broadcasting in a minute, and then have a good Christmas. And if we get in touch with each other in the new year, and then you can give you a bit of time to research it, and I'll research it, and then we can debate it again. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Have a happy holidays.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bernie. Take care, mate.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the opportunity, mate.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks a lot, man.